My mother-in-law handed me a check for $50,000 and said, "This is yours if you leave before the wedding." I looked at that check, looked at her son, and made a choice that changed everything. But here's what she didn't know. I wasn't walking away empty-handed. Before we get into this story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. You're about to hear how I went from being told I wasn't good enough to building something they could never take from me. Drop a comment and let me know, have you ever been underestimated? Now, let's get into it. My name is Simone, and I need you to understand something right from the start. I'm not the kind of woman who goes looking for drama. I'm an accountant from Detroit. I wear sensible shoes, I double-check my work, and I keep my business to myself. So when I tell you this story, know that I really tried to make it work. I met Darnell at a professional conference in Atlanta 3 years ago. He was presenting on corporate law and nonprofit partnerships, and I was there representing the firm I worked for at the time. During the lunch break, we ended up at the same table, and he asked me what I thought about his presentation. Most men don't actually want your opinion, they want your admiration, but Darnell listened when I suggested he'd missed a key tax advantage in his proposal. He pulled out his phone, took notes, and asked if we could continue the conversation over dinner. That's how it started. No games, no pretense, just two professionals who respected each other's minds. He was 32, I was 28. He practiced corporate law in Charleston, came from what he called an established family, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. We did long distance for 6 months, weekend flights, late-night video calls, text messages that made me smile during my lunch breaks. When he asked me to visit Charleston and meet his family, I thought it meant something. I thought it meant we were building toward forever. The Bennett estate sat on 12 acres in the historic district of Charleston. I'm talking about the kind of house you see in magazines, with the wraparound porch, the ancient oak trees, and the garden that somebody's full-time job was to maintain. Darnell's father, Calvin, was a retired judge. His mother, Lorraine, came from doctors and educators. She never let you forget it. His younger sister, Brianna, was finishing law school, following in everybody's footsteps like a good Bennett daughter should. I pulled up in my paid-off Toyota, and I could feel the judgment before I even got out of the car. Lorraine met us at the door wearing pearls at 2 p.m, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "So you're Simone," she said, looking me up and down like she was calculating my net worth based on my outfit. "Darnell has told us so much about you." The way she said it, you'd think he'd been confessing sins instead of talking about his girlfriend. That whole weekend was a performance, dinner conversations where they talked about people I'd never met and places I'd never been. Questions about my family that were really questions about my pedigree. "Where did you say your father worked?" Calvin asked. And when I said he was a mechanic who owned his own shop, the silence at that table was louder than any insult Lorraine recovered first. "How industrious," she said, which is rich people talk for how unfortunate. Brianna was worse because she pretended to be nice. "It must be so different for you here," she said with this sympathetic smile, like I was a foreign exchange student instead of a grown woman with a career and a degree. "Charleston has such a specific culture. It takes time to adjust." Translation: "You don't belong here and you never will." Darnell defended me, but it was weak. "Simone's firm handles major corporate accounts," he'd say, or "she's brilliant with numbers." Like he had to justify my existence with my resume, he never once said, "This is the woman I love, and if you can't respect her, we're leaving." That should have been my first sign, but love makes you ignore red flags and call them pink. He proposed 6 months later, on a beach in Savannah at sunset. It was beautiful. The ring was beautiful. His words were beautiful. And for about 24 hours, I let myself believe that we were going to build something real. Then the wedding planning started, and I realized I wasn't planning a wedding. I was auditioning for a role I was never going to get. Lorraine took over everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, the menu. When I suggested my cousin, who's a photographer, could do the pictures, she actually laughed. "Oh, sweetie, this is a Bennett wedding. We have standards to maintain." When I wanted to include some of my family's traditions, she patted my hand like I was a child. Let's keep things classic and elegant, shall we? Classic and elegant meant white, meant expensive, meant nothing about me was good enough to be part of their legacy. The worst part wasn't Lorraine's control, it was watching Darnell let it happen. Every time I brought up a concern, he'd say, "Just let her have this, baby. It's easier than fighting." Easier for who? Not for me. Not for my mother, who kept asking why none of our family's input mattered. Not for my father, who wrote a check for his contribution and watched them spend 10 times that amount without blinking. I was disappearing into their vision of who I should be, and the man who said he loved me was holding the door open while I faded away. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lorraine called me. "Let's have lunch," she said. "Just us girls. We should talk." I knew something was coming. You don't get to be my age as a black woman in corporate America without developing an instinct for when somebody's about to try you. We met at this expensive restaurant downtown, the kind where they don't list prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. Lorraine ordered a salad and white wine. I ordered the salmon and water because I wanted my head completely clear for whatever was about to happen. She made small talk for exactly 10 minutes. Talked about the weather, about Brianna's new job offer, about the flowers for the wedding. Then she set down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. "Simone, you seem like a nice girl," she started, and my whole body went tense because nothing good has ever followed that sentence. "You're smart, you're hardworking, and I can see why Darnell was attracted to you. But attraction isn't the same as compatibility. This family has a certain way of doing things, certain expectations, and I don't think you understand the pressure that comes with being a Bennett." I stayed quiet. Let her talk. Let her show me exactly who she was. "I think you rushed into this engagement," she continued. "You got caught up in the romance of it all, and that's understandable, but marriage is about more than feelings. It's about legacy, about maintaining what generations have built. And truthfully, I don't think you're ready for that responsibility." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, placed it on the table between us like it was a gift instead of an insult. "There's $50,000 in here," she said. "It's yours, no strings attached. If you end this engagement before the wedding, you can tell people whatever you want. Say it was mutual, say you got cold feet, say Darnell wasn't ready. I'll make sure he doesn't fight it. You can use this money for a fresh start somewhere. Buy yourself something nice, take a trip, invest in your future." She smiled like we were conspirators instead of enemies. "The greatest gift you could give my son's wedding is if you disappear from our family. Let him marry someone who fits." I looked at that check, $50,000. To some people that's generational wealth. To Lorraine Bennett, it was the price of getting rid of a problem. I picked up the envelope, put it in my purse, and looked her dead in the eye. "I'll think about it," I said. She looked surprised, like she expected me to throw wine in her face or cry or make a scene. But I'm not that woman. I'm the woman who goes home, opens her laptop, and starts digging. I spent the next 3 days going through everything, every file Darnell had ever shared with me, every conversation we'd had about his finances, every document I'd helped him organize. See, Darnell wasn't good with numbers. He was brilliant in a courtroom, but when it came to his investments and his trust fund and his business planning, he was lost. So for the past year, I'd been helping him. Managing his portfolio, organizing his tax documents, reviewing his financial statements. He'd given me access to everything because he trusted me and because he needed me. That's when I found it. The trust fund clause. If Darnell married someone without his parents' written approval, he wouldn't get access to his $3 million trust until he turned 40. He was 32. That's 8 years of waiting, and Lorraine knew he'd never do it. She wasn't protecting him from me. She was protecting his money from his choices. But that wasn't even the best part. Going through his files, I found proposals I'd written. 3 detailed business consulting reports for expanding Bennett and Associates into financial planning services. I'd spent weeks on them, researching markets, building projections, creating implementation strategies. Darnell said he wanted my opinion on some ideas for the firm I thought we were brainstorming together. Turns out, he'd given those proposals to his father. and Calvin had used every single one of them. The firm made over $800,000 in new revenue from my work, my ideas, my research, my strategy, and not once did anyone mention my name. I had copies of everything. The original files with my name on them, the timestamps, the email where Darnell asked if he could share these thoughts with his dad, which I'd said yes to because I thought it was pillow talk, not theft. I had proof that they'd built part of their business on my unpaid labor, while telling me I wasn't good enough to be part of their family. That night, I went to Darnell's apartment. He was excited to see me, wanted to talk about the final details for the wedding, kept showing me pictures of the venue setup. I let him talk. Then I asked him a simple question. "Did your mother offer me money to leave you?" His face went pale, then red. Then he got angry, but not at her, at the situation. "I can't believe she did that," he said. "That's so inappropriate. I'm going to talk to her." But he didn't reach for his phone. He didn't say we were calling off the wedding until his family apologized. He just looked tired and said, "Can you just ignore it? She'll come around eventually." Ignore it, like it was a small thing, like his mother hadn't just tried to pay me to disappear. "Will she?" I asked. "Come around eventually, because I've been waiting a year for that and it hasn't happened yet. Every time they disrespect me, you tell me to be patient. Every time they exclude me, you say it takes time." "How much time, Darnell? How long do I have to audition to be good enough for your family?" He didn't have an answer, or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to say it out loud. Either way, I knew he would never choose me over them, and I wasn't going to spend my life begging someone to fight for me. "I'm leaving," I said. "The engagement's off." He started to panic then, started making promises about how things would change, how he'd talk to his mother, how we'd move away if we had to. But they were empty words from a man who'd had a year to stand up and never did. I went home that night and I made a plan. Not out of anger, though I was angry, not out of revenge, though they deserved it. Out of principle. They owed me, and I was going to collect. I wrote a letter. Calm, professional, and clear. "Lorraine, thank you for the $50,000. I've decided to accept your offer and end my relationship with your son. However, I'm keeping more than just your check. I'm keeping my dignity, my self-respect, and compensation for the work I provided to Bennett and Associates." I cashed that check the next morning. Then I sent copies of my consulting proposals, along with proof of Bennett and Associates' revenue from those strategies, to a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property. I wasn't asking for $1 million. I was asking for what was fair: $500,000 for my work, a written apology from the firm, and a legally binding agreement that none of them would ever contact me again. The lawyer said they'd fight it. I said, let them try. I had documentation, I had timestamps, I had emails. I had everything I needed to prove that they'd used my work without compensation or credit, and more importantly, I had something they didn't want: bad publicity. Imagine the headlines: prominent black law firm steals ideas from son's black fiancé, pays her to leave. In Charleston's social circles, that kind of scandal doesn't fade. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of their lawyers calling my lawyer, trying to negotiate down, trying to intimidate me into settling for less, but I didn't budge. $500,000 or I file a lawsuit and let the whole city know what kind of people the Bennetts really were. They paid every dollar. The check came with a 1-page letter from Calvin, written in the stiff language of someone who'd been forced to apologize by their attorney. It didn't matter. I didn't need his remorse. I needed my worth recognized in dollars and cents, and it was. $550,000 total. I took that money, moved back to Detroit, and started Monroe Financial Solutions. I focused on something I knew too well: helping Black professionals protect their work, build their wealth, and understand their value. I specialized in consulting for people who were the first in their families to reach certain levels, people who were navigating spaces that weren't built for them, people who needed someone in their corner who understood. The business grew faster than I expected. Turns out, there are a lot of us out here. A lot of people who've been underestimated, underpaid, and undervalued. People who just needed someone to show them how to build their own tables instead of begging for seats at someone else's. Within 2 years, I was a millionaire. Not from luck, not from inheritance, but from the same thing that got me through that whole situation with the Bennetts: strategy, discipline, and knowing my worth. Within 4 years, I had 3 offices and a team of 15 consultants. We were changing lives, building generational wealth for families who'd never had it, and doing it all without compromising who we were. I heard through mutual connections what happened to the Bennetts. Darnell tried to reach out a few times. Emails I never opened, calls I never answered, a letter I returned unopened. He dated several women his mother approved of. None of them lasted. Last I heard, he's still single, still working at his father's firm, still living the life his family planned for him. Good for him. That was never going to be my story. Lorraine's reputation took a hit. Not publicly, they made sure of that, but in the circles she cared about. People knew, people whispered about the girl they'd tried to pay off, about the settlement they'd had to make. At garden parties and charity events, the Bennett name didn't shine quite as bright. Brianna even tried to connect with me on social media a year later. I blocked her without a second thought. You don't get access to my life after you made it clear I wasn't good enough for yours. The real victory wasn't the money, though I won't pretend that didn't feel good. The real victory was realizing that their rejection was a redirection. They thought they were getting rid of a problem. Really, they were setting me free to become who I was always meant to be. I'm engaged now. His name is Trevor, and he's a high school history teacher who coaches basketball on the side. He doesn't come from money. His family doesn't have a legacy. What he has is a good heart, a strong character, and a family that welcomed me from day one. His mother hugged me the first time we met and asked what my favorite meal was so she could make it next time his father told me stories about Trevor as a kid and showed me pictures like I was already part of the family. That's what love looks like. Not control, not conditions, just acceptance. Sometimes I think about that lunch with Lorraine, that envelope on the table, that moment when she thought $50,000 was enough to erase me from her son's life. She was right about one thing, though. Me disappearing was the greatest gift. Not for her family. For me. They thought they were getting rid of me, but really, they freed me. Lorraine was right about one thing. Me disappearing was the greatest gift. Not for their family, but for me. If this story spoke to you, don't just scroll past. Hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't already, because I've got more stories about turning pain into power. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done with that $50,000 check? And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something they could never give you. I'll see you in the next one.